medieval civil wars, brothers killing each other and baby nephews, men dying in battle, people ravishing their own lands, civilians living in constant fear for their lives and property. What lovely times! Strangely enough, a lot of people who participated in those sort of fun little events are now deemed a bit controversial. Turns out, blinding a couple stupid kids and creating political unrest within a country can get you on the wrong side of history these days. Ain't none the lips hate more than seeing men do masculine things. Am I right, fellas? Whichever country you're from, if you attended the school history class, you can probably name a civil war or two that happened in your area at some point in time. These bad boys are not at all uncommon and are usually associated with some specific names. If you so happen to be from Norway, what probably first came to mind were the civil wars that happened in a time period from 1130 to 1240. And as for the names, one thing's for sure, that's quite a lot of Sigurds, and one of them we're going to be talking about today. Sigurd Slembe, a man who appeared in the beginning of the Civil War era claiming to be a son of the late King Magnus III and had a brief but eventful political presence. This video will delve into the first years of the Norwegian Civil Wars, the events leading up to it, and in particular how it looked for one of the people trying to get the throne. Before we get too far into this whole thing, however, I should take a second to formally apologize to any Icelanders or Scandinavians in general that could be watching me. I cannot properly read Old Norse or any of his descendant languages, so in this video I unfortunately will be mercilessly butchering a lot of Scandinavian words. So buckle up, buttercup. Let's get started with discovering the life path of a medieval pretender to the Norwegian throne and the highs and lows of being an unrecognized royal bastard. Allegedly, at least. However, the picture wouldn't be complete without us first reviewing the sources for the man's biography and their overall genre. So strap in for a little tour through Scandinavian medieval sagas, from which we will go straight to the main attraction, which is the man, the myth, legend that is Sigurd Slembe. First of all, what is a saga? In history and literature, this term is usually used to refer to a specific type of Scandinavian medieval text. They are works written in prose in the Old Norse language, mostly in the 13th and 14th century Iceland. They are supposed to be based on true events and tell the stories of the Scandinavian people of different eras and, depending on the genre, places, and social standings. There is also the retelling of classical stories of different nations, in particular the Romans, the Greeks, and the French, but that is a pretty small subset and not very relevant or exciting, so whatever. The genre that is most relevant to us is the konungasögur, the king's sagas. As Iceland never really had a monarchy of their own, they wrote about the mainland kings, mostly ones of Norway, which had a lot of influence in Iceland at the time, and in 1262 established its rule over the country, ending the era of the Icelandic Commonwealth. A lot of those were written in the 12th century, describing near-contemporary events, although most of those ones have been lost. You may be wondering about how credible those sagas are and whether they can be used as a historical source. That, my friend, is a very good question that a lot of people have been asking for a very long time. To clear up the confusion, I will go through a few points that should be considered when evaluating the historical accuracy of the sagas. First of all, how do the authors gather information for their works? As you can imagine, the scientific method and the systemization of knowledge was lacking in the 13th century. The print wasn't even invented yet, so for the most part, it's oral accounts. And how reliable were those? I mean, obviously, we don't really know, but it is generally agreed that the rule of thumb is to see how far apart the creation of the saga and the events it describes are set in time, and the closer they are, the higher the chance of accuracy. So, for example, an author of a saga describing something that supposedly happened 500 years ago is much less likely to have had the events accurately passed down to him than someone who is 50 years away from them. When it comes to our sources, Morkinskinna, meaning moldy leather, and Heimskringla, The Cycle of the World, were both written in the 1220s and 1230s, which is 80 plus years from the death of our hero. However, this fact is not alarming. Most of the information in the sagas about Sigurd was taken by its authors from an earlier, now lost, work by Eirik Oddsson, Hrygjarstykki. Hrygjarstykki, in its turn, could have been written as early as the 1150s, putting it pretty close to describe events. Furthermore, Eirik Oddsson likely talked to the participants of said events if he wasn't one himself. A common source led to the two works relay most of the same things, and you can definitely see the Hrygjarstykki impact side by side. However, there are some differences, and Heimskringla Heimskringla tends to be more detailed. Considering that even nowadays a lot of historical nonfiction authors have a clear bias in their works, it probably won't surprise you that another aspect to look out for here is the author's personal views, beliefs, and affiliations. In our case, the authors of Morkinskinna and Heimskringla themselves don't really pour a lot of their own personal opinions into their works, for the most part trying to give grace to both sides of the conflict. Once again, we should instead focus on their source, which does seem to have an overly positive outlook on Sigurd, in its turn affecting how he presents in Morkinskinna and Heimskringla. Not only is he viewed positively in Hrugjarstykki, he is viewed as a saint, which brings us to another problem of literary tropes. After all, we should remember the sagas are not scientific works and are pieces of literature first and foremost. It's kind of like historical movies. They do try to relay some sort of an authentic story, but if they can make it more entertaining, they probably will. For example, when it comes to sanctifying someone, the person will likely be shown as a god-loving martyr because there's nothing Christians love more than a martyr. Sagas will also exaggerate their hero's role in history as well as focusing disproportionately on conflict, leaving out the more normal and peaceful times and events. That's pretty much all we need to know about the sagas right now and the ones I used in particular. Other than the sagas themselves, the sources weren't really plenty, at least considering that I don't know Norwegian. What I did also use was a 2015 master's thesis by Ole Arbert Trøning regarding material support from abroad in the civil wars, but only really the introduction where he talks about sagas. A lot of what I just said was from there. Other than that, I came up empty, so this video is a product of me being left alone with original sources and Google. Hopefully I did not majorly misunderstand something. That would be embarrassing, but we will only find that out in chapter 2. Sigurd was born in around 1100 to a woman named Thora. She allegedly told the boy that he was the offspring of King Magnus Barefoot, but this had to be kept secret because his sister, Sigrid, was the mother of one of Magnus's recognized children, Olaf. If you're wondering, no, Sigrid wasn't the queen. At the time, it was customary for Norwegian kings to hold concubines or lovers. It was kind of an official position at the court, and their sons had a very real claim to the throne, although you will soon see that this is not saying much because pretty much anyone did. If we only count the children that were recognized officially by King Magnus himself, he had 5. 3 of them boys, all born to different mothers and all ruling, at least officially, together after the death of their father in 1103. I say at least officially because Olaf, Sigurd's alleged half-brother cousin, died a teenager in 1115 and never actually held any real power. Kind of off topic, but Magnus himself died at around 30 and already had 2 teenage sons who could co-rule. He apparently had them at about 15 or 16 and he wasn't even king yet. Fun times, huh? Considering the times and circumstances, you could have already guessed that sisterly love wasn't really the thing allegedly keeping Magnus and Thora from revealing they had a child. In their time, an intimate relationship between a man and his child's aunt was considered incestuous and greatly shameful, making its product a demonstration of the dishonor. Of course, being a child of such connection was shameful and usually not something to scream about as well. This is something to keep in mind as it may explain to you some of the things we are about to go through. All in all, Jon Sigurd was not accepted into the court and was raised in a south by a priest named Albright, giving many the impression that he was the boy's father. Growing up with a priest, Sigurd was schooled in a church and at some point ordained as a deacon, which is why he was often called Slemdjaken, meaning something like noisy priest. The other variant was just calling him noisy, and that part is based on character. I'm sure you'll see why as we make our way through his biography. Once he was grown and, quote, in every accomplishment far ahead of his contemporaries or practically anyone else in Norway, Sigurd decided that he didn't want to be a church boy and went abroad, where he remained for a long time. Morkinskinna contains a description of his appearance. Sigurd was a big, handsome man with brown hair and a somewhat low forehead. He had blue eyes, regular features, and a bump on his nose. He was adroit and a man of great prowess, the most accomplished of men in every way. He first went to the Orkney Islands of Scotland, where he stayed with one Earl Harald before becoming involved in a conspiracy to kill a man named Thorkel Fostri, after which he went to seek out the king of the Scots. Of course, the king, David I, realized that Sigurd was the greatest man to ever exist the moment he came into his side, and so the Norwegian remained there for some time in great honor. While in Scotland, Sigurd is said to have participated in several battles on the king's side, always coming out victorious. After he had enough of Scotland, where he stayed for about 5 years, Sigurd traveled through Rome to Jerusalem and visited the holy shrines, after which he was apparently absolved from his sins. From Jerusalem, he went through Greece, France, and Saxony, finishing his voyage back at the Orkney Islands. He then went to Denmark, where he claimed to have had his paternity tested. You're probably wondering about how the hell do you affirm someone's claimed origin in the middle of the Middle Ages? Well, it's quite simple, really. I reckon you already know the answer to your question. Tell me, who do you go to as a medieval person when you need answers? When you need help? When you need someone to show you the way? When anything fucking happens in your life? Say it with me now. 3, 2, 1. God. It's God. They did this thing called trial by ordeal, which was used in the medieval justice practice when all other methods of proof failed or were inapplicable, or in high political situations such as this. Most commonly, the ordeals had to do with fire or water. You've probably heard of the water ordeals, as they were often used on witches. You know, this thing was submerging them in water and seeing if they drown. But in situations like ours, there was usually held a trial by fire. That sounds kind of misleading, as they usually had to do more with heat than with actual fire. Most common were the trials by boiling water and iron. With the former, one must put the hand in a pot of boiling water and retrieve some sort of an object. With the latter, carry a piece of red-hot iron through a certain distance, usually only a couple meters. They're not monsters after all, which is what Sigurd did. The trial itself was not in lack of injury on the accused, but in its healing. The burn was to be bandaged and checked in 3 days, the result being proclaimed in accordance with the healing process. If God deemed the person innocent, the injury would heal fast. Obviously, Sigurd passed the test. However, his opponents apparently expressed doubts that he did, calling the whole thing a deceit of the Danes. It does make sense from a certain standpoint, as Sigurd was in close cooperation with the Danish during his fight for the Norwegian throne, and saying that, quote, 5 bishops deemed most distinguished confirmed his paternity was a great way to solidify the claim. Unfortunately, neither I nor anyone else currently living could tell you whether the thing actually happened, so we'll just have to follow our intuition, I guess. Also, I'm not sure I would personally consider trial by anything other than DNA testing a credible source in this sort of thing, but that might just be me. Anyways, after spending a few years on merchant voyages, Sigurd Slembe came to Iceland. There he stayed in Saurbær with a man named Thorgils Oddsson, whom he did not tell his true identity. This is the moment when the sagas retell the stories of Sigurd saving a sheep from slaughter and a woman from being punished for theft because they appealed to him, as well as using a bunch of kittens to disturb a game of chess to prevent his fellow Norwegian from losing. Those are meant to showcase Sigurd's chivalry and cunning. He also demonstrated some of those priestly skills of his and naturally gained more and more respect the longer he stayed there. When leaving, he told Thorgils, his host, that he should refer his men to Sigurd Slembe, and when asked about his relation to Sigurd, dropped the "I'm Sigurd Slembe, a son of King Magnus Barefoot," got on his ship and dipped. Finally, it's goodbye Iceland, goodbye World Tour, and hello Norway, hello Civil War. Hey. It's been a whole ass month since I shot the first half of this, so we can only hope and pray that this video comes out before 2024 rolls around. I better hurry up, I guess. Let's get started. I'm afraid that before describing more of the wonderful adventures of a noble hero, I should at first delve a bit into the political situation in Norway by 1136, when Sigurd arrived back home. Remember those brother kings that stepped into power in 1103? Well, they're kind of dead. As I already mentioned, first died Olaf in 1115, although he was pretty irrelevant, then Eystein in 1123, and finally Sigurd Slembe, or Sigurd the Crusader, gave his soul to God in 1130, thus marking the beginning of the Norwegian civil wars. Why, you might ask? Did none of them have sons? Actually, weirdly enough, despite both Sigurd and Eystein living to see their 30s, being married and having concubines, the two of them only had 3 children in total, 2 of whom were girls and obviously didn't matter. But Sigurd Slembe did have a son with a concubine, Magnus. And no, I don't know why these people had like 5 names to go around, don't ask me. Of course, it wasn't all that simple with Magnus, how could it be? When his father died, he was most likely still only a teenager, meaning that he wasn't fit to rule on his own. But if that was the main issue here, we'd have a completely different story on our hands. The thing is that our guide Sigurd Slembe was not the only one wanting to get some of that sweet royal power. In about 1127, an Irishman named somehow both Gillechrist and Harald showed up at the Norwegian court claiming to be an illegitimate son of the late King Magnus Barefoot, thus proving that every bitch can in fact be a son. Harald and his mother came to the king, and despite many of his advices being against it, King Sigurd said that he would not deny the man an ordeal to prove his paternity. Naturally, there was a condition. Was the result to be positive, the newcomer must not try and snatch the throne from neither Sigurd nor his son Magnus. Harald agreed and swore to that, and a harsh, greatest ever made in Norway ordeal was arranged for him. To prove his words, the man had to walk barefoot through 9 glowing hot plowshares, which many thought was too harsh to just prove paternity, but he agreed to it anyway. 3 days later, they check his feet, and obviously they're miraculously healed. At least, that's what the sagas want us to believe. Once again, I'm of the opinion that a trial by iron, successful or otherwise, doesn't exactly prove anything, so let's look at the case of Harald Gille, as he came to be called, from a rational standpoint. Magnus Barefoot was the warrior king type, and for some reason his main targets were Scotland and Ireland and the Irish Sea. There were 2 campaigns related to this, one in 1098, in which they only stepped foot in Scotland and Man, and the second one in 1101, when they did set for Ireland. Magnus was killed in an ambush in the north of Ireland in 1103, and that man was pretty much all over the island for like a year or 2. Knowing just how great and noble medieval kings tended to be, I don't find the idea of him fathering someone, Harald in particular, in this period outrageous. That is, of course, if we believe that Harald really did come from Ireland and that he was the right age for this to have happened. Even then, the Norwegian King Magnus hanging out in Ireland at the time wasn't exactly a secret, and being in the same country as someone at the time they were born doesn't really stand in parenthood testing. I too could come out and say I'm the daughter of any random in my vicinity and even walk on hot iron with enough motivation. Doesn't mean I'm actually their child. So for the sake of objectivity, I think we should just operate from a neutral position here, okay? The reason why I doubt Harald's pure intentions of finding family, unity and love in Norway is because right after the death of Sigurd Slembe, he broke his oath of not trying to take the throne of Norway. Of course, the sagas will tell you what a wicked man Magnus, son of Sigurd, was and how great and beloved Harald Gille was. So great, in fact, that he was practically forced by the people to take kingship of half the country. That's an interesting way to say that someone came to a country, claimed relation to the king, and once that one, with 27 years on the throne and a firm grip on it, died, usurped the power from his teenage son, despite claiming that he wouldn't. Like, I'm sorry, but that's way too convenient for me to believe that it was all pure coincidence and not a plot that this Irish rando was waiting to execute. I should, however, say that this doesn't necessarily mean that Harold wasn't related to the kings, as you are probably aware that that's just how people moved back then. Killing, maiming, backstabbing your relatives wasn't exactly unheard of when it came to royalty, so that wouldn't really be anything new. For 3 years, Magnus and Harald ruled their respective parts of the country in peace until Magnus decided that he wanted to take back what he thought to be rightfully his. Long story short, this did not go in his favor, and the young king ended up being captured and mutilated. Per King Harald's orders, Magnus was castrated, had his foot cut off, and both eyes picked out, due to which he has since been dubbed Magnus the Blind. After that, he was sent away to the Nidarholm Abbey, located on an island near Trondheim, where he was basically kept as prisoner. And just like that, in 1134, Harald Gille became the one and only king of Norway. That, however, was pretty short-lived, as this is where Sigurd Slembe finally steps in, and as we know, where he goes, havoc follows. When in 1136 Sigurd arrived back to Norway, he of course went straight to the king to notify him of his lineage and ask for acknowledgement. Harald evidently did not know what to do with him, and after counsel with his mates, guess what he did? He accused Sigurd of participating in the murder of Thorkel Fostri back in Orkney. As it turned out, Thorkel was apparently one of Harald's besties and was with him when he first came to Norway. Personally, I'm a bit confused on the logistics of that, but okay. Not that you need a close and personal connection to the victim to convict someone of their murder, but considering the way Heimskringla talks about Harald, I wouldn't be surprised if him knowing Thorkel was only put in as a way to make him dodging Sigurd's claim this way seem less shady. I mean, how convenient is it? Someone comes to the court claiming to be the king's half-brother, much like you once did, and then managed to usurp the power by maiming and imprisoning the rightful king. And you just so happen to find out that this guy had a hand in killing someone in another country like 10 years ago, so you cannot even consider his claim, and he has to simply be executed ASAP. Once again, Harald, very normal, inconspicuous behavior. As you could probably have guessed, no, Sigurd was never executed, but not for the lack of trying. One night, Harald's men took him out on a boat, I guess without telling the goal of the trip, and were just like, "Oh, come on, mate, Uber fun out there. Do not ride the boats into the sea at night and party away in them in Scotland. fuck do they do for fun out there? I don't know why I decided to Britishize it so much. They're supposed to be Norwegian, but it is how it is. Despite the lack of context, being the amazing human he was, Sigurd sensed that something was off here and managed to escape from his captors. He somehow successfully swam to the shore, which they were supposed to be pretty far away from, and I somehow doubt that the Norwegian waters are too hot even in the summer, but I should probably stop looking into the logistics of the sagas that much, right? Once ashore, Sigurd ran to the nearby mountains and hid away there while Harald's men were looking for him. Now, this is completely irrelevant to the overall story, but I do want to quote you a little something from this night in Sigurd's life, as described in Heimskringla, that did make me chuckle. He lay down in a cleft of the rocks, and as he was very cold, he took off his trousers, cut a hole in the seat of them, and stuck his head through it, and put his arms in the legs of them. I just keep imagining this man laying butt-ass naked in a bunch of rocks with this improvised crop top on, like, what? After that, for the remainder of autumn and the beginning of winter, Sigurd hid away in Bergen in a house of a priest friend, and at some point came up with the plan of Harald's assassination. Many other men, including the king's own courtmen, participated in the killing. As a result of this plot, King Harald Gille was murdered in the bed of his concubine Thora on the 14th of December 1136. Sigurd had hoped that getting Harald out of the way would be a sure way to make himself king, but when he came out being like, I killed the king and now you should crown me as his brother, turned out most people weren't really feeling it. First of all, they said that they would never serve the man who killed his brother, and if you're not his brother, then what are you even doing here? And second, Harald was alleged to be a saint, and killing a holy man is of course a big no-no. I just want the kind of PR Harald Gille had, because I'm so sure that this man could torture an orphan to death in the middle of a town square and people will go like, well, I'm sure he had his reasons. For the murder of King Harald, all of the participants were sentenced to death, but they, namely Sigurd, managed to flee on boat to Hordaland, where he was accepted as king. But he, of course, did not stop there. I broke my mind trying to figure out which piece of the country went to whom in the end of things, so all I will tell you is that some Norwegians did accept Sigurd Slembe as their king, but most stood behind one of the Haraldson brothers, Sigurd or Inge, because once again their daddy was considered a saint. The two brother kings were still infants, so obviously they personally weren't doing anything other than pissing their beds and learning the alphabet at the time of their upcoming events. Therefore, I will mostly be saying King Sigurd and King Inge's forces did, rather than King Inge or King Sigurd did, because, let's be honest, the 3-year-old wasn't calling the shots there. To avoid confusion, I say we called Sigurd Haraldsson Sigurd Munn to distinguish him from his alleged uncle, Sigurd Slembe. They not have any other names available. To aid him in his fight for the throne and get some more support on his side, Sigurd Slembe decided to bail Magnus the Blind out of Nidarholm. My finger is bleeding. They sent a message to his friends to tell Magnus to prepare for the escape and set off for Trondheim. After fighting over the monks, Sigurd and company managed to snatch Magnus away and headed with him out of the fjord. There they met up with their allies. Sigurd proclaimed Magnus his co-king and they split forces. Sigurd went west, Magnus east. In the uplands, Magnus gathered much support and was eventually attacked by King Inge's forces. Despite having more people, Magnus lost the fight and fled to Denmark, where he went around telling everyone that Norway was free to conquer for anyone who had the courage to. The invasions by both Gotland and Denmark proved to be disastrous. Although the king set in the sagas to be in power in Gotland at the time, Karl Sverkersson only assumed the throne in the 1150s, so this might just be a case of the sagas saying things for the plot. Or I might just be stupid. Maybe. Another relevant detail I really want to share with you is this Magnus versus Inge battle description in Heimskringla. It is related that Thjostolf Alason carried King Inge in his belt as long as the battle lasted and stood under the banner, but Thjostolf was hard pressed by fatigue and fighting, and it is commonly said that King Inge got his ill health there, and which he retained as long as he lived, so that his back was knotted into a hump and the one foot was shorter than the other, and he was besides so infirm that he could scarcely walk as long as he lived. First of all, they really brought the 1-year-old into the heat of the battle and were dead serious about it. Second of all, I'm not sure that that's how disabilities are really made, but I appreciate the little 13th century medical insight. After Magnus took the L with trying to get the Danish to kill off their opposition, him and Sigurd kinda decided to go around killing and robbing and mauling people, I guess. Here are some quotes from Morkinskinna to briefly illustrate this period in their lives. He came out carrying the head in his hand. He seized the priest Svein and his 2 sons and had them all killed. He met Svignagrim and had his right hand cut off. He let Hedden off but killed Kalfr. They hang him, then sailed south to Denmark, and so on and so forth. A bloody couple of years these two had. And no, this is not my inner Brit jumping out, I mean this quite literally. I will spare you the trouble of describing every atrocity they committed in this time, and just skip to the grand finale of this whole campaign if you don't mind. In the autumn of 1139, Sigurd and Magnus sailed from Denmark towards Norway with 30 ships, 18 of them Danish and 12 Norwegian. It should be noted that in the years prior, Sigurd did a lot to win the favor of the Danish king, Erik Lam, often fighting in his battles, in hope to eventually receive the Danish support, and it seemed like the goal was accomplished. When the people of Inge I and Sigurd Moon learned of the upcoming attack, a fleet of 20 large ships was sent to Pretender's Way. The two forces met on the 12th of November near Hvaler, which is in the south of Norway, and the Battle of Holmengrad ensued. The Danes turned their ships around and went home as soon as things started to get heated, and I reckon Sigurd felt real good about all the shit he did for them at that moment. I doubt that he had a lot of time to think about that though. After the betrayal of the Danish, Sigurd Slembe and Magnus' side of the conflict apparently decided that the battle was as good as lost for them and quickly started to clear out their ships. As the last ship was almost empty, Magnus, who was after all missing a foot and both eyes, was still in his bed. One of his devoted men, Hreider Grjotgertsen, tried to carry Magnus out of the ship, but on their way out, Hreider was struck with a spear on his back. It came out the other way and punctured his chest, killing Magnus with the same hit. His body was later found and transported to Oslo, where Magnus was buried in the Halvards Cathedral beside his father, Sigurd Slembe. Most of the men closest to Magnus the Blind and Sigurd Slembediaken fell in that battle. However, Sigurd himself almost managed to escape. Almost, but not quite. Initially, the king's forces couldn't find Sigurd among the fallen soldiers, but one of his injured men gave him away in exchange for mercy, saying that Sigurd will be under a red floating shield. His plan was to escape by shedding his armor and swimming away under a shield with a tinderbox covered in wax. The pretender was captured and brought to the shore. When it was announced to the army that Sigurd had been caught, the crowd cheered and the prisoner said, "Many a wicked man will be overjoyed at my expense today." When asked how could the son of a slave like you be so bold as to claim to be King Magnus' son, Sigurd replied, "My father is not to be compared to your father or a slave, for your father amounted to very little compared to mine." Most people wanted to kill him right away, but there were those who wanted revenge for the murders of their loved ones and insisted on torturing Sigurd first. Many refused to watch and went away. I don't want to describe what was done to Sigurd afterwards because it is pretty brutal and I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. I mean, it might be a little too late for that. I did spend the last 40 minutes talking to you about all the wonders of medieval civil wars with no censorship, but still. Torture is pretty nasty and irrelevant. In the end of things, Sigurd was hanged, decapitated, and buried under a heap of stones. It was said that during all that he endured, Sigurd appeared calm and talked as if he was having a normal conversation, periodically singing parts of the psalm book. The body was thus buried by a local priest in his church, but when the kings found out, they were angry with him, ordered to place the body back under the rocks and for the priest to pay a fine. Afterwards, Sigurd's friends came from Denmark and transported his body to Alaborg.
Right, so remember when in the beginning of the video I said that hopefully I don't majorly misunderstand something? Well, what do you know? It happened. The thing is, Heimskringla, at least the version I found, said that he was buried in Alaborg. I googled it and it said that it is a lost Varangian fort in the north of Russia. So I was like, okay, lost Scandinavian town, lost Scandinavian grave, makes sense I guess. It did seem kinda sus to me that a Norwegian's Danish friends would randomly bury him in some fuck off town in Russia, but what do I know? I couldn't find any other information regarding Sigurd's burial, so I just went with it. But now, as I'm editing, come to find out that Alaborg is actually supposed to be Aalborg, which is a town in Denmark. There is some record of Sigurd being buried in the Abbey of Our Lady there in 1140, although the grave has never been found. However, it's been almost 900 years and the church went through some shit in that time, even was demolished and rebuilt in the 19th century, so that's not really surprising. Anyways, sorry for that little misunderstanding. Good thing I caught it before publishing the video.
And that, my dear viewer, was the story of Sigurd Slembe, his era, and his fight for the Norwegian throne, as described by the saga writers. How much of it is true and how much fiction, we will likely never know, but I am not here to provide you some sensational truth about what happened 900 years ago. I'm just a girl on the internet talking about things in history I find interesting, and I think most of us can agree that this is quite a story. Apparently, I'm not the only one thinking that. In 1862, Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson, one of the greatest Norwegian writers, 1903 Literature Nobel Prize winner, and the author of the lyrics to the current national anthem of Norway, released a 3-part dramatic poem, Sigurd Slembe. The story, written in contemporary Norwegian, presents a more sympathetic look on Sigurd from the standpoint of his pretended claims being true and brushes over some of the less likable characteristics. However, it does mostly stick to the storyline of the sagas. The poem is considered to be the most prominent of Bjørnson's early works. With that, we can say that despite his short-lived and at times questionable royal career, Sigurd did manage to leave a lasting legacy, leading to people hundreds of years later remembering and even praising him. It may seem strange to us now, but as we know, the Middle Ages were a completely different time with completely different morals, when sleeping with your mistress's sister was considered incest, and you could still be a holy man after mutilating your nephew. Sigurd was a product of his time, and played by its oftentimes cruel rules, still losing at the end. Life is unfair, what can I say? So, what do you think of Sigurd? People surrounding him, the events? Do you maybe want me to continue talking about the Norwegian civil wars? Do you maybe want me to do something else from the sagas? Be sure to comment any thoughts down below, and also like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and perhaps follow me on socials, which will be down in the description. This is only my second video, so any and all support truly matters to me. Thank you for sticking until the end, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Bye!